Assistant Superintendent's report.
Good evening. The reports tonight will provide the Board of Education with financial information for the month of January, which represents 58% of the fiscal year. The first report is on board book page. If you could go to board book page 25, Mary Ann, please. The monthly summary report has the total operating revenue for the month, which was $907,641, with 63% coming from federal and state reimbursements, 20% coming from evidence-based funding, which is our state funding, and then 11% coming from property tax and CPPRT, primarily that corporate personal replacement tax. The total operating expenditure for the month was $2,069,588, with 72% towards salary and benefits, 11% for special education tuition, and 9% for operations and maintenance, and that was primarily to pay our liability insurance premiums. The next reports are the monthly financial statements. The fund balances summary shows that the district is deficit spending in its operating funds of $2,251,753. This will continue for the month of February as well until the district receives more property tax, which we'll get a large payment in March. And then this year with COVID, we anticipate not getting all of that and some of that trickling in. The summary of revenues for the district shows that the district has received 51% of our budgeted revenue for the year. So similar to this time last year, we were at 49%, but we were very conservative in our revenue budget this year. And then the summary of expenditures shows that the district has spent 56% of the budgeted expenditures for this year, and this amount is down from this time last fiscal year, which was at 60%. Also, for the board's information, like I do every month, I've included the statement of revenue and expenditures report along with the student activity account summary for the month of January. My next report begins on board book page 49. And this is the financial projections for fiscal year 22 through 25, as Dr. Skink has referenced. Annually, I provide the board with financial projections for the next 4 years. In order to make these financial projections, we need to enter information or assumptions into the software. Some of these assumptions have changed a little bit from previous years due to COVID. So I'd like to take a minute just to highlight some of the bigger ones. I'm not going to read all of them for you, but the first one on the revenue side is the property tax collection. For next fiscal year 22, we have it remaining at 97% of collection. Typically, we budget 99% for property tax collection. And then in fiscal year 23, we move that up to 98% and then back to 99% for the last 2 years. Corporate property taxes were decreased from $375,000 to $350,000 to reflect not only a more accurate 3-year average, but also the impact due to COVID. We know the consumer price index that we'll use on our upcoming levy in December, and that is dropped significantly from 2.3 this past levy to 1.4%. And then moving forward for the assumptions, we have that set at 2% for CPI. And then evidence-based funding, we have held flat. Governor Pritzker has said in his proposed budget that he's committed to maintaining that evidence-based funding. We'll see if that holds out in the actual budget, but that's why we have left that flat for our assumptions. On the expenditure side, staff...
Kristen, real quick.
Yep.
With the revenue, the property tax collection, so like under the consumer price index, you put every 1% is approximately $210,000. So with the revenue, with the property tax collection, every 1% is roughly
$210,000 to $220,000.
okay.
On the expenditure side, staff salaries increase for next year. Returning certified staff salaries increase at 3.87%. Please note that doesn't factor into the retirement savings, which are noted later, as well as any staffing changes, which we call FTE, either reductions to that. Those are also factored in later. And then our contract, our CBA is up after fiscal year 22, and so we've put a placeholder in moving forward at 3%. Administrative contracts, we have an assumption at increasing at 2% for next year and then 2.5% for future years as a placeholder. Non-certified staff, we typically make an assumption at 3%. Staff hiring projections are based off of enrollment projections. So fiscal year 22, next year, we have a decrease of 1.3 FTE. Fiscal year 23, no change. And then 24 and 25, each year would decrease by 0.6 due to a decrease in enrollment. And then the retirement savings is the other big one that I would like to touch on. And that significantly varies from year to year based off of the number of staff members that we have retiring. So you can see 1 year it's 0 in terms of savings, and another year it's $273,000. So moving on to the next page, the actual projections.
I have a quick question.
Is
Is there a way that you've got 3.87 as the staffing increase? Can you run that to also incorporate the retirement? I know it's not fluid for multi-years, but I think it'd be helpful to know what the actual staffing increase percentage is for next year.
Yes, sure, I can do that separately.
Wait, say that again? Instead of just showing 3.87% for FY '22 and then have footnoting that no retirement savings, what's the actual percentage? I think just think it'd be a little bit more,
Yeah, that's
Transparent there, maybe.
that's not a number I can pull from the program, but I can calculate
Okay.
that and share that out with the board.
thank you.
So looking at the actual assumptions, I know it's probably incredibly hard to read if you're just looking at the
Mary Ann,
screen.
can you blow that up to like 200%?
And if you scroll down, I'm going to start in the budget, the black column all the way on to the left. So this is where our current budget is at, and you can see the deficit, the projected deficit for this year has decreased a little bit from what I presented in the initial budget. I haven't changed the budget, but I have decreased that number by $150,000 because at the start of the school year, we had 2 retirements that were unexpected. And so we had some savings there. And the way this program works is those staffing numbers are then used to make the following projections, or the projections for next year. So it was important that I corrected that before moving forward. So that's why you can see that adjustment there. Next, if you look at the row going across, so everything highlighted in yellow, those are the projected deficits for each year. So you can see that first number for fiscal year 22 next year, the projected deficit is $998,702. Fiscal year 23 is $597,572. You can see the next year, fiscal year 24, is a little bit over $1 million deficit, and then the following year is a deficit of $200,000 roughly. And so one thing that I'd like to note is that these projections have increased from what I had presented last year. And I'm sure, last year was a little bit of a blur, but if you remember, I presented these projections last year a week before we went on quarantine. And so we really had no idea how COVID would impact us financially at that point, or if at all. And so the red box on the very bottom, if you could scroll down, Mary Ann, includes what the projections were at this time last year for the upcoming fiscal years, and then why they are significantly different. And the main difference is that we are losing revenue in many areas. Decreased revenue for property tax collection, interest on investment, food service commission, building rentals, and local fees, and then increased expenditures in regards to both operations and maintenance for PPE and cleaning supplies, as well as an increase in special education tuition. And then the last thing I'd like to highlight is right above that red box are the blue numbers. And so there are 2 sets of fund balances. The black numbers that are above the blue numbers are fund balances that include the $2.9 million that we have reserved in working cash. And so it's really important to take a look at the blue numbers instead, because that backs out that $2.9 million that's reserved for the field project or land acquisition. And so looking at that, it's concerning that, if you look the first year, and after fiscal year 22, we would be at a fund balance of 39.21%. And if you look all the way to the right, you're at a 30% fund balance. And that means that the district can operate for 3.68 months without receiving any additional revenue. And if you remember to my presentation earlier, how we've been deficit spending for a few months because we're waiting for more property tax to come in, that's why it's incredibly important that we have that fund balance so that we can operate in the months that we need to deficit spend in order for that money to come back in. So we will certainly need to keep an eye on this. We update projections every year, and things will certainly change with COVID, but it's important to keep an eye on that fund balance. I have other items in my report, but I want to pause and answer any questions that you may have in regards to the financial projections.
I have some comments, I think, right? Sort of back to, I guess I was going to bring up to what you just said, right? Like if we go back to the pie graphs, right? Like basically our expenditures were double our revenue this month, right? About 900,000 and about, right? So when does that next big chunk of money come from the state?
It won't be from the state. The next big chunk of money will come from property tax in March.
Okay. So March, okay.
Although I think it's actually has a delayed collection.
Now they did a delayed collection,
Yeah.
right? So like what people don't understand is that we are heavily dependent on property tax collection. So the fact that we're going to 97 instead of 99 is roughly $500,000 right there. So if you look at Kristen's projection just for FY21 in that red box, we were supposed to finish this year around 574. The board has made a conscious effort to try to do these as close to real as possible, because in the past we've always done conservative projections like worst case scenario, which is kind of what you're supposed to do, so you're preparing for the worst. But I mean, there were some years where we would project $1 million deficit and we'd come in with a surplus of $300,000, right? That's a $1.3 million swing in layman's terms. So I think the important thing to highlight is, that delay in property tax collection and the impact of COVID is not only going to impact us just this year, it will impact us in future year because you receive your tax dollars in the rear.
Right.
And so you can see just that $500,000 in property tax collection, that's not even counting like the lost commission from rentals, the lost commission from student fees, the lost commission from cafeteria not being open. So there's a lot of impact that we have to plan for probably the next 2 years until we're fully out of the impact of COVID. And that drives a lot of our decision making. If you look at next year, the deficit was supposed to be around 273 because we had a lot of retirees coming off the books, and that was supposed to be kind of like our swing year, and now it's closer to $1 million. And so it's important that, I know we had many discussions in the last few years about fund balance and people's philosophy on fund balance, but I think you're starting to see when county comes out and says, hey, we're going to delay, you have an extra 2 months to pay your property taxes. Well, we basically then take out of the bank or this fund balance an extra 2 months of bills that have to be paid, and payroll and lights and gas, and so will that money get replaced? It should if we get the property tax collection we're expecting. But if somebody takes 3 months or 4 months to pay their property taxes, we don't get a chance to recoup that. The county doesn't give us that money as a front and take it back. So
We also know the state is not fully funding at the formula that they promise us, for one. That we also are, what I'm hearing is EBF is dead in the water, right? That it's
I haven't heard that. I think we budgeted flat for EBF.
Correct.
That's not a game changer for us.
no, it's not for us.
But the game changer for us is if 2 or 3 points, if we come in 2 or 3 points lower on property tax collection, that's anywhere from $500,000 to $750,000. Now you already were expecting CPI is down. Okay, that's new money, so you're not getting in the past few years. It's been over 2%, so you're getting 1.4, which is it's an impact of about 190 to 210,000, like Kristen said. But it's the property tax collection that we're 90% reliant on, and
And in the fall, we were at about 95% of our property tax collection, which obviously is significantly lower than the 99% that we
Sure.
usually budget.
I would also like this assumption of back up to 98 and 99. I mean, if we historically look at what happened after 2008, this school district didn't feel that till 2011. So really, I'm worried for 3 years down the road what that means for not only RB, but all the schools in the state. I mean,
Yes, certainly now with COVID, it's hard to make a very accurate projection, 4 years out. So we will revise those as we go.
Sure.
Because yes, we could be experiencing the impact of COVID much more than two more fiscal years.
The fact that CPI is going down, I think, I mean, I've talked about this before at the board meeting, like EBF, right? Like there are 3 buckets of money where the state could put their money, right? Pre-K, K-12, higher ed. And they've basically abandoned the other 2 systems just to put all their money here. I don't think it's just, in my opinion, I don't think it's sustainable. So like when you look at those first 3 indicators for revenue in the future, in this state, it doesn't look very good. It does not look very good at all. Like I'm very concerned about our financial picture for the future. And I think we've done a great job of balancing and maintaining the level of service in this district, but I don't know, it's my opinion.
I'll add, I agree with that. 10 years ago, we're on the board.
Right.
We had that kind of recession. We had just many foreclosures in the neighborhood.
Sure.
Many. And that's probably when we had some of the biggest deficits. And that's when you remember we cut, just when Kevin was coming on.
I remember
we
being
cut
in this room speaking to that board about
Yes.
those cuts.
Everything. We cut all the musical. We had to cut everything just to save the academic programs. And like you're saying, I'm seeing unemployment numbers still increasing. I'm seeing, colleagues are not returning to work. We're in a reassessment tax year. I know my taxes are at the attorney's office, it's with everyone else fighting for that. I think we need to buckle down. I think, as a board, we probably want to start to say, is there anything we don't have to spend money on, we need to save? Because I think the storm is still coming.
I would agree.
Isn't there a moratorium right now on foreclosures anyway? So we wouldn't even feel that?
No,
Oh,
there's not.
Yeah, but they still don't have to pay their property tax, which we wouldn't get. So,
Right.
Kristen, the state recommends 33% fund balance, correct?
Correct.
So if this is true and we continue on course, by 2024, we'll have used up our savings that we've taken 10 years to build.
Well, it doesn't deplete the fund balance.
Doesn't deplete it, it would just be
No,
below,
but
would be low
we
to
are
threshold.
right at the cusp
But no, but it's,
of
but I want to be
the
clear, we're not going to be out of
recommendation.
money in
No,
4
we won't be
years.
out of
Well,
Okay,
money.
just below the
We need to
recommendation.
keep
But we'll look
that
at it. And there's board
33% because
policy
we
about
got
the
to our bills,
recommendation of what
right?
it should be. No, I mean, absolutely, I don't disagree. I just think it's important to not, and I want to be a little bit Pollyanna-ish about evidence-based funding because of the governor's address this week talked about using federal CARES money to actually get to the EBF numbers for this year. So I
Oh,
think
I missed that.
So I think
Sorry.
that some of the concerns about EBF, I think you're spot on, but it may not be in this fiscal year, maybe in future fiscal
Sure.
years. I mean, it's an area of alarm. I just think everyone is trying to balance and respond to COVID. Perhaps
We
it
also
won't be
have
as
to
much.
think about EBF to us
Yeah, we don't get a
is
lot.
75,000.
Yeah.
That's not like some of our neighboring districts that get 2 million every year. That's not us. We're like 75, 80,000, we'll get.
It's not saving the day.
We'll get some bump, but it won't be the same as like for every loss of percentage of property taxes.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think the percentage, what are we, 93% property tax 93% of our budget comes from property tax?
I don't have I can pull it up, it's in our budget, I don't have that number.
It's within the 90% range.
Yeah.
Correct.
It's
So,
high.
unlike, out of
all
all
the
the
money.
money that in the state of Illinois, that's reserved for Illinois, Chicago, that district takes about 75% of it. The collar suburbs in southern Illinois, we split the remaining 25%. If 93% of our budget, $22 million, is coming from property tax, and people's income and people's jobs are on the line paying this tax,
It's about 80% that comes from property tax, and then 7% is other local revenue. 11% is state and 3% is federal.
okay?
So that 7% is like the rental commission,
Food
the
commission,
cafeteria
student
commission, some
fees.
student fees,
Registration fees.
pay to participate, those kind of things.
Yes, exactly.
Well, you know, the idea of projections is to prepare the board and the community so they understand what goes into some of the decision making. And I know we dealt with a little bit of that tonight. You know, we have parents concerned with. We've tried to in the past, coming off of one recession back in 2008, when I put some of this stuff in place in 2011 with the board, was just to tie some of our largest expenditures directly to student request and enrollment and those types of things, so that we can try to manage within this range. The one thing I want to be prepared. So Kristen, in 3 or 4 years, none of us have a crystal ball. So the biggest thing is, how close are we going to? I mean, right now with this 1.4 at this fiscal year, what's your best? And I know you're not a fortune teller. You're not. Whether we get a huge payment from the
But boy, that would be cool.
from the county or whatever. Like, where do you think we're going to be finishing at? If you had to guess today, will it be $1.4 million deficit? Will it be closer? I mean, we haven't used all of our transportation for some sports, right? We had some
Correct.
staff. You already lowered it to account for some staff that retired or left, and we didn't replace.
Correct. I appreciate you putting me on the spot. It's an incredibly difficult answer right now because what's really going to drive that is our property tax collection in March and how much we get initially. We have been saving some money on expenditures, but I do think we will come in somewhere around $1 million in terms of our deficit.
Because we're chasing from the fall collection an additional 2 points, correct? We were at about 95 property tax collection when we budgeted for a 97 for that period.
I certainly, though, after the month of March, I will have a much more accurate answer. But if you ask me right now for, kind of just where I see this coming in at, I do think we'll be around $1 million deficit this year.
I was hoping you'd say like 500,000.
Well, it really depends on that March property tax collection. I was not anticipating the fall being at 94 to 95%. We've gotten a little bit of that trickling in since the fall, but I mean, it's really going to be driven by how much we collect in March, as well as where some of those expenditures are going to hit in June for athletics, because we've never had a June athletic season. And I think some of those expenditures are going to be pushed into
The next
fiscal year. And so there's also a timing issue for some of that. But like I said, if you ask me again at the end of March, I'll be able to give you a much more accurate picture.
But
So
this is
could
kind of
that-
my point. It's like it's so unpredictable.
Right. So
Right?
could that your deficit projection for FY '22 is 900,000 roughly, almost $1 million.
Correct.
But those expenses that will help lower the deficit for '21
Could then impact
for the summer
that.
sports could
Correct.
actually drive up the deficit for '22, because that money that we have allocated to pay for the sports this year, and we're not going to receive those transportation bills and official bills until
next
July
year.
1, which will impact a different fiscal year.
Correct.
And then-
There
And
could-
we're also going to,
And then if we assume sports get back on track.
right, if sports are back, so what I'm saying is you're going to be paying for sports at summer of '21's fiscal year, or it is June, and have to be ready to start paying fall sports again in August. So we're going to have some
Correct. And
almost like doubling
We'll work hard
up.
to try to get all of those June expenditures as much as we can in this fiscal year. But to your point, there is going to be, especially due to COVID, there could be a lot of things that change between now and then that could drive up that deficit projection for next year. Or, there could be some miracle and it could be significantly lowered. We could have some staffing changes, maybe more people decide to retire. But overall, I feel that, it will likely stay around that number. I think, things usually tend to wash themselves out. You might have some savings if a staff member decides to retire, but then you might have the athletic expenditures. So certainly that number is not set in stone. That will, vary as we go through the budget process.
And it's just that, it's a projection. So the board should be aware, the community that's watching should be aware. It is just that, it's a projection. It can fluctuate up, it can fluctuate down.
So that's $1 million difference than we've had. Every year we've come in a little bit above. We're now definitely looking to come in under, and we are looking to come in closely to $1 million behind what we have in the past 10 years.
Yes.
Yes,
It's
I
$1
think
million difference.
the alarming thing is if when you start every 200,000 roughly, like Kristen said, to keep math easy, is roughly a point off your fund balance. So you go from 43 to 39 pretty quick. You go from 39 to 36, 35 really within 2 years. And so
That's a huge change in 1 year. For us, for a district, we're a small district.
Yeah, we have a
That's 1/5.
smaller budget
That's
on the smaller
5%,
side,
yeah.
right.
Right.
It's the COVID effect.
And Deanna and Wes are on the finance committee, both have a strong finance background. I mean, I think I'm covering all the stuff we discussed, right? Is there any other way? I mean,
No, I think it's right, it's the right doom and gloom, though. I mean, I think it was a very good report, and I think our colleagues here have quickly identified this is not a problem that's going away or with a resolution that's around the corner next week. We have to kind of think through the ramifications.
right.
Yeah.
CARES money, I know there was a question submitted.
Oh, I'm not done with my report. I have other.
He has more, we were just stopping to talk about this.
Okay, keep
If
going.
we're ready to move on.
Yes.
Sure.
The next item is on Board Book page 51. I've provided for the board, kind of ties into the financial projections, but this is a calendar for how the budget is built for fiscal year '22. Nothing has changed in regards to the timeline, but I wanted to provide this to you so the board had a reminder of the overall budget process and when you'll be seeing information. Like last fiscal year, we'll continue to refine the budget as we get closer and closer to that final budget in September. So the board will see the budget multiple times, and we really start to dive into that process beginning in March next month. And then the last item in this report, I wanted to give the board a heads up that in March or April, the board will see a large bill for $136,540 to purchase Chromebooks for next year. The district has chosen to purchase these Chromebooks now to ensure that we have them at the start of next year. We're a little nervous because due to COVID, there's a shortage not only on Chromebooks, but on processing chips, and so we want to make sure that they're ready to go. I bring that to the board's attention because this is not a budgeted expense in this budget. We usually would wait till next fiscal year. And this cost includes not only the Chromebooks, but the Google management, which is required for each Chromebook. CARES Act money will be used to offset this purchase. And CARES Act, so there was a question submitted about this. So our initial CARES Act funding is $116,303. We've already been reimbursed for the lunch costs from the spring, which was roughly around $26,000. And we'll use the remaining money of the initial funding to purchase these Chromebooks, and with the new funding, we'll pay for the rest of these Chromebooks. In addition, once we receive the new money, we also plan to use a large portion of it to get reimbursed for our cost of our Aramark, which is our buildings and grounds, as well as some additional technology purchases. This is important to note that it's a reimbursement grant. So the best approach is really just to try to get that money in the district's hands right away by utilizing things that are easy to get approved in the grant, but also that are items that we know will get pushed through and that are purchases that we have already made. So the new money, like I said, the application process is not out yet, so we haven't been able to access that new CARES Act money because there is a second round. But once that comes available, we will apply for that and get that. We also still need to work through with our auditor in terms of using the grant for Aramark, because the grant money comes in on the educational account, but the expenditure is on the operations and maintenance account. So we just need to work through that issue with our auditor as well. But I'll provide a comprehensive report on how all the CARES Act money was spent on that COVID tracking document when I report out again on that towards the end of the year.
Is there a good chance that that CARES money, even if we're trying to reimburse for something we paid for this year to open school and clean school and do those things, we might not get that till after July 1?
It is possible. That's why I would recommend that we use it for Aramark purchase, because as soon as that grant comes available, I can apply, and then I can immediately apply for the reimbursement. So there's a stronger likelihood that we would then capture that money this fiscal year. If we tried to identify something that we would want next fiscal year, then we would have to wait to get reimbursed for that.
So
yes,
that technically, by
possibility.
reimbursing us for the Aramark expenses used to open school and the extra cleaning and PPE and all that
Correct.
stuff, that technically could, if we get reimbursed this fiscal year, could help offset some of that lost revenue from tax collection.
Correct, because at the end of the day, it all
One
comes
pot.
into the same pot of money. It all comes into the district.
Okay. Any other questions? You want to ask the board?
No? I noticed that.
No, but thank you for putting the budget calendar back in there. I appreciate
welcome.
that.
There's no, is that it for your report?
That concludes my report, yes.
Okay.
All righty.